All right, hi AP. So I wanted to put together a little video about embellishing tones and ornamentation when it comes to music and part writing and all of that stuff. This is what you'll probably see on the multiple choice section of the exam. It's not something I encourage you to use during the part writing. The simpler the better for that. So for your FRQs, keep it to one chord per beat and all of that good stuff. But it's important for you to understand the different types of ornamentation that happens in music so that you can analyze a score if you are presented with one or whatever. So we're just going to go quickly over some different types of embellishing tones first, and then we'll talk about different ornaments that you may find in music. I recommend that you kind of pay attention to the websites that I'm on, as they will be helpful for you to visit and kind of review on your own. So the first few embellishing tones I want to talk about are ones that we've seen already. We saw them when we started with counterpoint. So we have our passing tone, where we basically are filling in a skip between two notes, and it can be in either direction. It can be descending or ascending, but the key to a passing tone is that it's going to continue, right? That ascending or descending motion is going to continue back to a chord tone. So often embellishing tones do not belong to a chord. We call them non-harmonic, or here we have non-chord tones. There is a chance that you are using an embellishing tone that also belongs to the harmony, but oftentimes they don't. So a passing tone kind of fills in that gap between two other notes, and it either will be descending or ascending, continuing in that stepwise motion. A neighbor tone, or a complete neighbor tone, is when you go away from a note by step and then back to it. So you can go up and then back, you can go down and then back. You're still leaving the harmony to come back to it, right? But it's neighboring a repeated note. So whether you go up or down, a neighbor tone is right next door to that note, and you have to come back to the original note for it to be a complete neighbor tone. So we have neighbor and passing. Those are two very common ones we saw. We saw double neighbor as well when we did counterpoint. That's when you're basically using the two notes on either side of a repeated note. So here we have E, and we're playing F and D, and then coming back to E. So we're going above the note, below the note, and then back to the note. So instead of just choosing above the note or below the note, you do both of them and then come back to the original note. So this is also a form of a neighbor tone, but we call it a double neighbor note or double neighbor tone, double neighbor figure, double neighbor, because we're using both of the notes next to the repeated note. Now there are different types of incomplete neighbor tones, and we're going to see these below here. So an incomplete neighbor tone, you can see we have the note and then we're returning to a chord tone, but we're not returning to the same note as before. So an incomplete neighbor tone, there are two popular types, the appoggiatura and the escape tone. All right, so appoggiaturas and escape tones are both forms of incomplete neighbor tones, and they're opposites of each other. So an appoggiatura, you leap to and resolve by step. So if you leap up, you resolve down by step. Leap up, resolve down by step. You could reverse the direction if you're leaping down and resolving up by step. Okay, but there's a reversal of direction, and it's leap and step. Escape tone is the opposite. It's step and leap. So here we step up, leap down, step up, leap down. You could have an example where you step down and leap up. But these are two examples of what sometimes are called incomplete neighbor tones, but really if you want to be more specific, you'd classify it as either an appoggiatura where you have a leap set against a step in opposite directions, or an escape tone with a step against a leap in opposite directions. So that's what an escape tone is, and how it's similar and yet different from an appoggiatura. An anticipation is when you are anticipating the next harmony. So here we're looking at pretty much 5-1, right? Our harmony is 5-1 in the key of C major. So we have a 5 chord being implied here, and all of a sudden, before we get to beats 3 and 4, we're seeing that C chord, that tonic harmony, being foreshadowed. So we're anticipating that arrival to the one chord. So an anticipation is when you get a note from the next chord happening in the chord that immediately precedes it. So you're anticipating, you're getting ready, you're preparing the ear for that new chord. So it's a tone that comes too early, but it gives you that sense of anticipation, and that's where it gets its name. Syncopation is something we've talked about all the way back in applied music theory. Syncopation is when you kind of turn the beat around, if you will, and you emphasize a traditionally weaker part of the beat. So by emphasizing the upbeat here, the and a Thor, we're creating syncopation. So it's the idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, da, 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 da. So really we have a lot of syncopation happening in this example. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. You're emphasizing the and, the upbeat, the weak part of the beat, instead of the strong part of the beat. Okay, moving right along. Suspension doesn't always have to have a tie, but it is this idea of holding over, going from tension to release, or your preparation to the actual suspension itself to the resolution. So here we're seeing a dissonant interval resolving to a third, 4/3 suspensions are very common. And we're seeing that we have this note, we have C and G sounding together, and the G holds through while that C resolves to a B. So we're going from, again, dissonance to consonance. Oftentimes you will see this written with a tie, but in this case it isn't. And it still would be a suspension because this note is being held through. So if you're kind of reading the examples here, there's more detail. If you want to pause the video here and read the definition, feel free. The common types of suspensions are here. So this is the starting interval, the dissonant interval, and then resolving to the consonant interval second. Now, a retardation is essentially a suspension that resolves up. So here you're seeing this dissonance resolving up, upwards here. If we're looking at a seventh between C and B, and it resolves to 8. So you're looking at the interval getting wider instead of the interval getting smaller. We also have a 4/3 suspension written here too, so this is a little tricky to look at. But a retardation is the interval going from dissonant small to larger consonant interval. So it's, instead of resolving down like we're used to seeing suspensions, it resolves upwards. So it's just like a suspension, but the direction of the resolution is opposite. Here's another image of embellishing tones that I think is helpful, right? To see our passing tone, our neighbor tone. We can see our anticipation, right? This new note from this new chord being played early. Our escape tone, step and then leap in opposite directions. And then a cambiata, which did come up earlier in our classes, but sometimes it's hard to understand, but is much more clearer. It's much clearer when we look at escape tone. A cambiata is when you leap and then resolve by step in opposite directions. Now, an appoggiatura, and how that differs, from an appoggiatura is that, let me find my appoggiatura here. An appoggiatura is usually on a strong beat. It is accented, right? So it's usually on the downbeat. Whereas if you're looking at this cambiata, the leap happens on a weak beat. So it's a lot of words that basically just describe different things you can do to embellish your melody. So again, if you are curious about reviewing any of these, please visit the websites up here and here, Open Music Theory, if you would like to review a little bit more outside of this video. Now the last figure I want to show you has to do with ornamentation, and in my experience ornamentation and embellishments go hand in hand, but ornamentation usually refers more to earlier music, maybe more Baroque style and early classical, where you might see these symbols instead of the music written out with the ornamentation. So here you can see some examples of ornaments. And we can see how it would be written, notated in the music, right? A trill on G, and then we're kind of seeing what this would look like. So written in the music. So if we have a trill, we usually go above the note and then back to the note. So it's da 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 da. That's the idea of a trill. We have mordants, and we can see what the two different mordants look like here. We have a mordant on D, where we go da da da, we go up, and then if we have the mordant with the line through it, it means to go down, da da da. So these are just little ornamentations, little ways to add something to the melody without having to really analyze a different note in the harmony. So embellishing tones are actual notes that exist there on the music that we may need to um, kind of parse through to make sure we know what we're supposed to be analyzing. The nice thing about these ornamentation symbols, even though you have to kind of memorize what they mean, is they don't make it more complicated to look at. They don't make the music more complicated to look at by cluttering it up with just these little ornaments, these little extra add-ins to make it sound fancy. So in appoggiatura, this is where ornaments and embellishments kind of overlap. An appoggiatura can be written like this. It's as we might call a grace note, but without the slash. And this is accented, right? Appoggiaturas happen on the beat. So when you see a grace note with no slash, it means it happens on the beat. So this would be D, C, D, C, right? So this is going to have more emphasis as opposed to an acciaccatura. An acciaccatura is what we often think of as grace notes, where we have the slash. Acciaccaturas happen before the downbeat. Ba-dum, 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 right? So you're still aiming for the downbeat with the big note, and the little note comes just before it. So when you see the slash through it, you have an acciaccatura. That means it is unaccented. You still give the downbeat to the big note, but an appoggiatura has no slash through it and it's accented. So you're supposed to go da-dum. And it might not be two quarter notes exactly, but you are giving that downbeat to the ornament. The last ornament we have here are turns, where we have the da-da-da-da-da, if you ever have heard that example. So you'll see this symbol sometimes, and it basically means to go above and below and back. Very similar to a double neighbor tone. However, what's different is we include that original note, right? Da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. So instead of just going above and below and back, we go above, go back to the original, go below, go back to the original. And that is the idea of a turn. So these are just some ideas of ornamentation and embellishments and how they kind of relate to each other. If you would like to learn more, please check out the chapter 16 from our textbook. That gives you more information on embellishing tones. Thank you.